Good morning. It is October 20th in the morning, and I'm here with Dr. Tate. Thanks for joining me, Dr. Tate, right now. I'm going to kick off by reading your bio, and then we'll just have a good conversation. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So Professor Derrick Tate is the professor of computer science and engineering at Sattler College. He received a BSME degree from Rice University, and his SM and PhD degrees in mechanical engineering are from MIT in the areas of manufacturing and design. I'm going to pause. Can you tell us what BSME, what is that?
That's Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering.
Good. And then SM?
Master of Science.
And then I think PhD is familiar enough.
Yeah.
Prior to joining Sattler College, he was senior associate professor at,
Xianjiaotong, Liverpool.
One more time.
Xianjiaotong, Liverpool
University, and founding head of the Department of Industrial Design. Dr. Tate has also held positions as assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Texas Tech University and associate professor of Beijing, one more time?
Beijing Jiaotong
University.
Yeah.
Thanks for helping with the pronunciation there. Professor Tate's industrial experience includes working as a manager of applications engineering at Axiomatic Design Software, Inc., a Boston-based startup company. And then I'm going to read this next part too.
That's fine.
Do you want to add or subtract anything from that initial bio there?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It may come up again, some of it, but
yeah, hopefully we can hone in on it. Professor Tate has been involved with Christian groups in China and America. He aims to impact society by bringing design thinking to areas of strategic importance and to integrate an understanding of human flourishing into the design of new products and services. His calling is to make space for Christians in academia, to bring Christian ideas into academic discourse, and to mentor a new generation of Christian researchers and professionals. Thanks so much for being here with me.
yeah, thanks for having me.
I thought we could just start by, I know that bio is very condensed and academic in nature.
Right.
Would you mind just sharing a little bit more about your life story, about where you were born and how you got to where you are now, so we can understand your trajectory and chronology there a little bit?
My career trajectory has been, I guess, a little bit unusual in the sense that, as you can tell from the bio, I've been kind of all over the place geographically.
Right.
And I guess growing up is a little bit like that as well. So, grew up in the South, went to college in Houston, and came to Boston for grad school, and then left Boston in 2001, went to Colorado, Beijing, Lubbock, and then back to China in Suzhou, and then here. So I came back to Boston in 2019.
That's right.
So I was gone for about 18 years. And then I've kind of moved around in terms of discipline, in terms of what I've been teaching, because I shifted from mechanical engineering to industrial design, and then now I'm doing computer science. But there are, I guess, some themes and connections in there that kind of explain how that happened in terms of the program I was doing at Texas Tech, for example, was a master's and PhD of transdisciplinary design, process, and systems. And so I had a lot of students that had backgrounds in software engineering and as well as other engineering disciplines. And so then I ended up with a bunch of publications that were related to artificial intelligence and data mining and natural language processing and things like that, as well as my experience working for the software company previously. So when you look at my CV or bio, it's kind of all over the place. But the themes that tie it together, one, I guess, is this emphasis on being cross-disciplinary. The other would be doing things related to entrepreneurship, whether it's the startup institutions I've been working for or trying to connect entrepreneurs with the university and design. And then the other would be, this focus on kind of design thinking and applying that to, general problems in society.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. Let's hone in on that startup,
right?
That startup word, because as I understand, you've worked at multiple startup universities.
Correct.
And I'd love to hear you talk about your experience and your thinking around startup universities.
Right. So I guess the reason I went into engineering in the first place, when I was in high school, my goal was to create a car company.
Right.
Right. So I wanted to be somebody like John DeLorean or Preston Tucker. because I had an interest in, I don't know, cars and restoring old cars and things like that. And so then I studied mechanical engineering at Rice as an undergrad. And then when I graduated, I realized, well, I don't really know any more about starting a car company than when I started.
Right.
And so I continued on to grad school and did stuff in design and manufacturing. But after graduating, I worked for a startup company that did software related to the design theory that I studied for my PhD. So it was with my advisor and some other people. And so that was axiomatic design software. And then after that, I went to work for some folks who were trying to start a university in Beijing. And we had a Chinese partner school, Capital University of Economics and Business, and we had a U.S. partner school, which was Indiana Wesleyan.
All right.
And so we were going to operate, I guess, as a branch campus of Indiana Wesleyan, and the name of the institution was Jingmei University, Jing from Beijing, and then Mei from Meiguo, which is America.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got a license to organize the institution, and we got a license to operate the institution. And I was working as special academic assistant to the president, working on accreditation, curriculum, and things like that. Unfortunately, the gentleman that had the vision for that is a guy named Dan Harrison, got brain cancer and passed away. So that did not end up working out. And so I ended up going to Beijing and teaching at a regular Chinese university, which you mentioned the bio was Beijing Jiaotong University.
Right.
So I was there for 2 years. And so that's, I guess a startup company, startup university. And then the second startup university was the Xi'an Jiaotong University. So that started in 2006 in Suzhou. I joined the institution in 2013. And so I was the founding head of the Department for Industrial Design. And we grew from 26 students to more than 300 students in the department, encompassing, I guess, bachelor's, master's, and PhD students, mostly undergrad, but some grad students.
Right.
And the institution grew from, I think, an initial number, and I never saw, officially, it was either 147 or 153 students the first year. And by the time I left in 2019, we had a quota from the Chinese government for 15,000 students. And so that counted both the students that were on campus in Suzhou, and the students had the option to go to Liverpool for their last 2 years of undergrad studies, which about low 40% of students would go.
That's in Germany.
In Liverpool, in the UK.
In the UK, okay.
Yeah. And so anyway, I counted both those students. So we had a large number of students. It was quite successful. So it was kind of a good institution for the Chinese students because a lot of their parents wanted the students to get international experience, and so it's okay, you can go to this, university, you have an opportunity to study an international environment and be a global citizen, but you could do the first 2 years in China so you didn't have to go too far away from home,
right.
Make sure you understood the language, and then you could go to Liverpool if you wanted. And in my department, I guess with the first group of industrial design students, 75% went to Liverpool. But by the time I left, the students liked our program better than what they were going to do in Liverpool. So it's probably reversed where, only a quarter of the students would go to Liverpool for the last 2 years.
Got it.
And then all the master's and PhD students were just on campus with us. But the students got 2 degrees. So they got a degree from XJTLU, which was accredited by the Chinese Ministry of Education in Jiangsu province, and then they got a Liverpool degree through Liverpool's accreditation.
So I guess my next question is, how does that translate over here to Boston, and why another another startup university versus a more established university? What are some of the lines of thinking there?
I mean, my whole sort of interest is in, I guess, kind of a startup environment and
right.
kind of creating new things. So kind of fits with my interest there. And I guess when I heard about Sattler and Sattler's mission, it seemed like a good fit for things I was interested in doing. I guess my wife and I and our family were looking to come back to the States. And so Boston was one of the 2 areas that we were considering in terms of if we could rank wherever we could go in the U.S. Boston or probably Houston would be kind of the two first choices. Of course, I was looking, all over. But, yeah.
And you mentioned a few times this idea of a cross-disciplinary approach, and
Right.
I'd love to hear you think about that in your current role you're the head of the computer science major here, and
Right.
we sort of do have a cross-disciplinary mind of thinking about things, but in particular, computer science and Christianity, those two terms, sometimes that people associate them and sometimes people don't associate them. So I'm
Right.
curious on how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one benefit of being at a startup institution that, it's pretty small and you kind of know everybody and it's kind of a tight-knit community. So you have,
Right.
I guess, a lot more informal interaction and it's a lot easier to build some of those cross-disciplinary connections. But I think if you look at, the CS students the students in computer science at Sattler and kind of the things they're doing for their capstone projects, they are all, pretty much interested in cross-disciplinary topics. And I mean, you can kind of look at the variety, a chatbot for apologetics, a app for, building community in the city, how to facilitate, interaction and, during the day and interacting with communities and stuff in an urban context. And then doing a literacy app for building sort of competence in literacy in Hebrew. And then last year,
all of these are capstones that have happened here at Sattler.
Those were ours. That was the first group of students. And then last year we had a girl that did a interface for a microfinance app for a missions organization, and then using word embeddings for semantic search of ancient Greek texts. So, as I said, they're all kind of cross-disciplinary and kind of integrating the students' interest in, the church, community, their faith, biblical languages with something to do with CS. I mean, I had, opportunities to collaborate or communicate with, faculty in business. In principle, you could do collaboration with biology. We haven't had students that did that yet, but that's certainly an area that would work as well. So pretty much all of the other programs here would be something that you could work into a computer science capstone in one way or another.
And then just for people that don't know, what is a capstone and why is it? I know that word means different things to different people. My capstone was a very small part of my college experience, and I think it's a little bit different.
How small?
3 credits.
Okay.
So it's 3 credits and just basically a class so it's sort of a different experience here, and I maybe you can talk about how we leverage that.
Right. So, I mean, I guess got a lot of experience with capstones kind of across the different institutions that I've been at.
Right.
So typically in engineering, like where I was at Texas Tech, engineering students have a capstone that's usually 2 semesters and 3 credits per semester. Can't say 100% all institutions, but that would be kind of the typical iteration of it. And so my role when I was at Texas Tech was to usually do the first semester of that sequence, because we had 1,000 students in mechanical engineering. So we were always looking for kind of new projects, and we had multiple sections of that going on every semester. So I would do typically, I don't know, 1 grad course and 1 capstone course in the fall, and then in the spring I'd have 2 capstone sections, for example. And so you'd have 30 students in there. I had as many as 40, which is really too many. But we were always looking for topics. But the first semester is the students are defining a project that they're going to work on. And in engineering, typically it's a group project. And so the normal number would be about 4 students. You could have projects with more, 5 or 6. But then you end up with kind of the free rider problem, right? If you have that many. And so where we were in Lubbock, there were not like a lot of major industries in Lubbock. Lubbock's a city of about 200,000 people. And so you've got some number of hospitals, so healthcare, you've got the university. There's a lot of ranching and farming around, so like cattle ranching, cotton farming. There's some energy, not really oil production right in Lubbock, but once you got outside of town, and then a lot of like wind farms and things like that. So we didn't have like a lot of companies that you could talk to and say, okay, well, Ford or GM or somebody like that, okay, give us some projects for students to work on. And so a lot of our projects would either come from like other faculty, which is where the cross-disciplinary thing comes in, or the students would come up with topics themselves, or we had some like entrepreneurs in kind of West Texas generally that had topics that they were interested in. And so for me, it was good for the students to have a project to be, say, entrepreneurial, where it's like, okay, here's somebody, they've got an idea for a project, and they want to develop that and make something, test it, see is that a reasonable idea or not. So it's kind of low risk, but possibly high reward, right?
Right.
So it's like, okay, the students aren't getting any money for it. They're getting credit for their capstone. They're getting experience developing it. But they could start then with, interacting with users and trying to understand what the needs were. So the way I would teach the class, they would do a lot of interaction with users, doing like interviews or talking to people, defining the needs. And then there's different tools that you can learn in design, which maybe we'll get into design, kind of dealing with brainstorming or resolving contradictions in your requirements and things like that. And they can basically take the whole process and start at the very beginning and then develop into something that they can physically realize, at the end, that you can, touch. You've got something tangible. So examples of projects that the students did were things like from like some of the entrepreneurs like Papercrete. There was a guy that had a company for ready-mix cement, but he wanted to do something that's more sustainable. So could you take, recycled paper and make that into a block that you could use in buildings, houses, whatever. And so that was an interdisciplinary project where you had, mechanical engineering students working, but then some students in like civil engineering or architecture or other disciplines could look at that and say, okay, let's look at this, not just on the mechanical property of this block and the recipe, although you do that part, but also like how would this fit in kind of the larger context. Another example was compressed earth block. So there's a guy that had a extruder for making compressed earth block. He had a little prototype that made a block that was, 6 inches by 9 inches, and you could make a block. And we ended up, building equipment for that. It made a block that was like 1 foot by 1.5 feet, and you could make it whatever length you wanted, to like 10 feet long. And so you could use like a backhoe or a crane or something. But his goal was to take that sustainable material and make it competitive with timber frame construction. So you could have like a crew of, 6 people, and you could, build the walls for a house in a day, basically, so that it wouldn't be something that you'd only use for rich people making, like in New Mexico or some place where they've got a history of adobe construction, or in third world countries where the labor costs are much cheaper, but you could actually make it, competitive with timber frame construction in the U.S. And if you make the blocks without a stabilizer, then it's just soil and water.
Right.
And then at the end of life, you can just tear it up and put it back in the ground. So that would be some, entrepreneurial type projects. But sometimes the students would come up with, projects themselves. Like one student was interested in a clutch for a fixed gear bicycle. So it was just something he was interested in, or another student wanted to do a camera jib that you could use for video production, but he wanted something that you could set up and take down with one person, and he could throw in the back of a pickup truck and, take it to some site and use it for, videoing things. So anyway, you kind of have an idea, and then you want to make something with it and test and see, is this something, reasonable that you want to do? So the students at Texas Tech did that over 2 semesters.
Right.
In China, the capstone projects were individual projects because that was the requirement from the government in terms of how they run the fund your projects. But the students had a lot of other opportunities prior to their senior year to work in groups, so they weren't like missing the group interaction on their other projects. Whereas at Texas Tech, the Capstone project was probably the first time that they did anything in design, really. And so it was kind of a different experience than a lot of the other engineering courses where it's a lecture and solving problems and things like that. And so here at Sattler, the Capstone sequence in computer science is 12 credits, same as the other programs. And it's divided up so that in the junior year, the students work on kind of learning some tools related to the Capstone and defining the problem and coming up with a proposal. And then they have 3 credits in the fall of their senior year and 6 credits in the spring, which is more focused on like the implementation. And so they're able to kind of like percolate and kind of define their topic and maybe even shift around some. I mean, some of our students kind of went off in quite different directions than they originally intended. And so it gives them more time to develop it and really produce something that they can have for their portfolio.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's kind of a long answer, but
just out of curiosity, Graham, what are you doing for your we're joined by a computer science student. What are you doing for your capstone?
I'm working with an organization called FaithTech.
Okay.
That brings Christian technologists together in community, and they volunteer to build things, work with technology to help the church and the poor.
That's awesome. And so there's a lot of cross-discipline there because I'm assuming a lot of that project isn't, I'm going to use the word in the weeds in computer science. Is that true or false? Or like in the tell me about it.
Yeah, it's very cross-disciplinary. At least at this stage, there's a lot of organizational work, and also the organization has a focus on theology around how should the church think about technology and what is a distinctly Christian way to create and use technology.
Do you have any comments on that capstone in particular, or FaithTech? I think that group at their meeting here, they launched the Boston initiative and they're
right
on campus here. Anything else about that?
I mean, so far I guess we've had 2 in-person meetups here at Sattler. Okay. One was in January and one was the end of September. Next one will be this coming January.
Okay.
So we have a Boston, I guess, lead team for organizing the FaithTech activities and trying to build a community. We had, 35 people, I think, at both meetings. And so Graham and I are working on the labs portion of the FaithTech activities. So the way their groups work, they've got meetups, which are kind of networking, dinner, speaker, and then you've got labs where people develop projects similar to the Capstone.
Right.
People working in technology potentially. And then they, as Graham indicated, have maybe some other activities looking at, bigger picture issues, ethics related to technology and how that relates to theology and things like that. We've got some different ideas on how we can, grow the group here, and Graham's contributing to that.
Great. And then I wanted to sort of focus in on a word that comes out in your bio and in the way that you talk. And
yeah.
I'm guessing most humans probably don't think about the word design the same way that you do. So tell me about what design mean, what are design tools, and how does it relate to all of to everything you're talking about?
So design, I would say, is a sort of fundamental human activity.
Okay.
Right. And people, like you said, don't necessarily think of it that way. They think of, okay, well, design, maybe sketching a car or something, right? It's kind of an artistic activity, but not necessarily something that everybody's doing. And that can be part of design, certainly. But like an example that a gentleman I know from Worcester Polytechnic Institute uses is like designing your vacation.
Right.
Right. So design,
or like a honeymoon or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So design is anytime you're mapping from what you want to do to how you're going to do it.
Sorry, I'm just sorry. Graham gave me a funny look over there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So you're going from what to how.
Okay.
And anything you can represent as mapping from what you want to do to how you're going to do it is a design problem. So like I said, it could be your your vacation, could be honeymoon, but could be a car, it could be a computer, could be whatever. You can define it, I guess, more formally as like developing and or selecting means to satisfy objectives subject to constraints.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got three things there, right? The objective, what you're trying to do. You've got your means, which, could be like the car, the sketch of the car, and so on. And then you've got constraints, which would be limits on what would be an acceptable solution. So the constraints would basically say, okay, certain things are, out of bounds. It could be too expensive. It could take too long. Has to fit with like an existing system. Okay, you got to use, this port, and you got to plug into the existing, USB port or something. So that would limit your choices.
Right.
But anything you can represent with those different pieces would be a design problem. So very, very cross-disciplinary approach to it.
And then the other word I want to focus on, and then I'll try to connect them here, is the word human, the term human flourishing. So Graham actually mentioned it a little bit here too in FaithTech, that there's this idea that there's poverty exists in the world, and there are things that we can be doing towards moving away from poverty towards human flourishing, and across the board here. So tell me a little bit about human flourishing, and then I'll try to connect design and human flourishing together, and maybe loop in computer science as a way to think about doing that.
Right. So for design, I guess, how to say, in terms of, I guess, my approach to design, some things to think about. One, it's like a specific discipline. So as you mentioned, there are different tools that you can use in the design process. So there would be like a sort of process that you would follow. There's tools in Axiomatic Design, which was the name of the software company, and kind of what I did for my PhD. Basically, the axioms would help you identify or recognize good design. There's other tools like the theory of inventive problem solving, which comes from the former Soviet Union. It's like TRIZ. It looks at how do you resolve conflict or contradiction, and the goal is to be more creative. There's other tools as well. So anyway, design is kind of like its own discipline that you could apply to many different areas. The second would be that you focus on users, which is where the human flourishing comes in. And I guess there's not, I guess human would maybe be the kind of broadest term that you could think about there. When you think of like users of a design, a piece of software or something, it's like the person that's like actually, typing in things and actually making use of it. And in, say business, you could maybe distinguish that from the customer. So somebody making the decisions about which product or which software to buy may not be the person that's the end user. And you can do other, I guess, categorizations of users like lead users, which would be people that want to adopt a new technology first because they stand to get some, significant benefit from adopting that technology. But, if you, I guess if you come up with a design or product without really thinking about the users or really understanding their context, then it's going to be hard to have something that's really successful. So you really need to take into account, what the product needs to do, which would be the functionality, which would come from, the users in kind of this broadest sense, including other, stakeholders and the company manufacturing it or whoever is involved with it, as well as kind of the economics of it. Is it something that is going to be able to be sustainable based on the economic aspect of it, and then also sort of environment and sustainability kind of point of view. So you really have to look at any design from kind of multiple perspectives, and if you don't consider all those, then you can come up with something, but nobody wants to use it, or you can come up with it, but it's not economically feasible. And you see that a lot with technologies today, where companies are losing money on for example, like AI tools that people are using online. They see it as an investment. Okay, people are using this, and we're getting data, and we're seeing what applications and stuff of it are, but it's not something that can necessarily be maintained at the level that it currently is indefinitely, because each time somebody's using it, potentially the company's losing money. Right. So you got to think about kind of all these different aspects. But as I said, the goal is not just thinking, well, can we do something, but is it something that we, really should be doing or want to do, and how does it contribute to, like you said, human flourishing at the sort of individual level, or in terms of like interaction with other people and kind of group level, or even at like a societal level.
And then help me think about a little bit. There's a pool of like in a hypothetical or a real situation, there's a pool of young people, let's just say going into a college, and they're considering what to invest themselves in.
Right.
Let's just even say the Sattler environment, computer science, history, business,
Right.
biology. And usually there's a problem that somebody cares about a little bit more than another problem.
Right.
Why is studying computer science a compelling way to think about addressing a particular issue? Let's even use like classic issues we're dealing with let's just say global poverty,
Right.
or maybe even now here we see even like clashes, political clashes, polarization. There's a lot of different arenas happening and rolling out ahead of us. Why is computer science a compelling field for Christians to use to address problems? It's a kind of a big question.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, it would be sort of the ideal,
Right.
place to situate yourself in being able to address these problems. I mean, at Sattler, in particular, there's like a large core curriculum that everybody's taking. And so Sattler has the cohort model where the students come in together, focus in on these core courses, get kind of a body of knowledge related to biblical languages, humanities, Western heritage, and classics, and so on. But then, once you have that foundation, you can think, well, how do I use that to do something? And the sort of things our students have been doing, both for their capstones and then maybe after they leave Sattler, address some of these areas that connect with technology and their other interests, like, their faith. So, for example, like the microfinance app that student did last year, right? So that would be a way to actually physically do something on the ground related to dealing with poverty and, refugees and things like that, where you're promoting some, I guess, educational materials related to finances, saving money. And then there was an app that was helping this organization implement their teaching and plans and stuff. And they were in, I forget, it was like 15 countries or something, that they have operations in. So here you're doing something very tangible. I guess the other thing to think about it, it's like you're graduating, you need to get a job. Technology obviously is something that everybody, pervades everybody's life these days. And so by understanding technology, it's going to help with some of these issues that you mentioned, whether it's polarization or political conflict and so on, because technology has a role to play in those. And if you're going to really address them, it's like you have to think, okay, well, how are people, interacting with social media, for example, and how, what effect do sort of patterns that people have of these interactions relate into increasing or decreasing polarization. Likewise with other types of conflict, there's a role for technology. And if people don't, consider the technology aspect of it, it's going to be hard to, really come up with solutions to these bigger questions. So it's not to say technology is going to be the only solution, right? But it needs to be kind of a part of the broader conversation.
Right.
So I remember there was a report from the National Association of Engineering, or National Academy of Engineering. They were talking about recruiting more people into engineering.
Right.
And I worked with a T-STEM Center at Texas Tech that did outreach to different high schools and kind of promoted engineering. And, they pointed out that, okay, the way that you recruit people to be medical doctors is you say, okay, you want to help people. You're going to help them get well. You're going to treat them, cure their illnesses, develop cures for diseases and so on. But the way people typically think about engineering, like high school teachers, they're like, oh, okay, well, you're good at math, or you're good at science, maybe you should think about engineering.
Right.
And it's like, well, if you're good at math or you're good at science, maybe you should be a, mathematician or a scientist, right?
Right.
I mean, the goal for engineering is to actually, create things that are going to meet people's needs, right? And so you're going to somehow improve people's lives by the things that you're creating, whether it's, a person individually or part of like a larger effort in most cases. But the goal is to, help people's lives be better. And I think Sattler provides a good context for wrestling with some of these issues in terms of, thinking about the impacts. Okay, if I make this, what are the social impacts?
Right.
And, how can we kind of learn from past technologies and the way that they've impacted people and society, and how can we make better decisions, moving forward with technology?
All right. Graham, has anything piqued your interest that you think we should talk about? If not, I got some more things to talk about. Anything?
Go for it.
Go for it. Yeah, thanks. The next sort of topic I want to explore, it's very, very related. When I look at technology and science, there's a perception that it's, I'll just say, secularizing at a very rapid pace. Mm-hmm. And even if you look at the largest companies in the world, let's say Google,
right.
Amazon, Apple, so even throw in Elon Musk companies, X, Tesla, they appear to be very secular and serving sort of a secular purpose. What is the role of the Christian? Is the role of the Christian to create a new company that stands for something different? Is it to try to innovate within the existing sphere, or is it maybe that's not the right way to think about it? How do we think about the secularizing environment and sort of holding to values while leveraging technology?
Right. I mean, I don't think there's like one answer, right? I mean, it's going to depend on the individual student. So I think, for example, the Capstone project and internships give the students a chance to kind of explore their options. We have connections with a number of, companies and organizations where students have done internships, some, in the U.S., some internationally as they're doing their bachelor's degrees. And then students have worked with different outside organizations for their capstones. I guess once they graduate and they start working, probably in most cases they'll go to work for an existing company, whether it's small or large. But maybe eventually they'll have some ideas where they could create their own company. So,
right.
I mean, I think there's room for any and all of that. When students are thinking about how they, want to apply their lives and what they want to do with their degrees. But I think something like FaithTech that Graham is involved with, I think that's one of the goals of FaithTech, is to kind of bring like-minded people together and to think, okay, maybe in my job I'm doing something pretty secular, but if I, work together with some other Christians that I meet through some networking event, meetup, we can develop something that has, maybe a more Christian application that would be something that would be good for the church.
Got it.
But there's not like one answer, obviously.
And then just to sort of lay this to rest, if somebody is particularly interested in the church, let's even say biblical missions or different ministries,
right?
Computer science is a viable way to fulfill those callings.
Right.
And I don't think the path is very well worn or well walked of people using those two together. So is there sort of anything that you'd like to see happening to have more people walking down this road? We think about it a lot as how do we drum up interest in computer science with a traditional audience that might not have imagined that path forward in their life.
Well, I mean, again, like we've got students that are working with different Christian organizations, for their internships and projects. And after they graduate, I know some of the students are interested in maybe living overseas and, continuing, to do things for the church in other countries.
So that's one thing. I've heard that computer science is like a door into other countries that you wouldn't traditionally have,
right?
With if you're have a non-technical experience. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that it would probably help in
Right.
getting visas and things like that.
Okay.
There are like Christian organizations that do things, that are very related to computer science, like, Wycliffe Bible Translators or somebody like that, right? They have a lot of software. They develop, different fonts for displaying, Greek text and other things, as well as like tools for, doing interviews of native speakers and transcribing that, using International Phonetic Alphabet and
Right.
other things, right? They're very, very technical. But even just the skills that, being able to talk to users or talk to people and kind of understand their problems and things like that could be used in a context that's, quite different than, developing the piece of software, right? It would be kind of a general life skill, some of these things related to design. And I do think there could be a role for making connections with like existing churches to kind of bring in some knowledge of technology to these churches where maybe congregations have questions, okay, well, how do we deal with technology? Or we have folks in the congregation have this or that or the other question, right, about technology and its impact on the church or people's lives and stuff. And I do think, doing activities to sort of promote sort of awareness and knowledge about technology among existing congregations would be something that would be beneficial.
Right. Is there a product that you currently use, or maybe a software or an app that is an example of the power of leveraging this? I have a couple in the back of my mind, but that sort of have made a meaningful difference in people's lives. Is there anything come to immediately to your mind?
Why don't you share yours?
The Bible app is a really interesting one that the YouVersion put it on. I think it's based out of the church. I forget
Oklahoma or something.
A big church down there, and then we have all our students use Logos or Logos Bible software, which leverages. It's a pretty incredible technology that leverages computer science software, but then the user experience, I think, is one of the most important things about that. So it's really interesting how you have to design it well so that it actually serves the purpose.
Right.
What other one? Do you have any that come to mind, Graham?
I use PrayerMate, which is an app to remind you to pray and help you to organize prayer lists and things like that.
PrayMate, remember, is an app that helps people memorize scripture.
Right.
We actually tried one time to design an app for our discipleship program for habit tracking.
Right.
Someday it might get launched. It's sitting on a shelf, the computer shelf, so to speak. But I think it's good to kind of think about, hey, these are examples of ways that this has happened before. Does anything come to your mind? Or I
guess I have.
You've already mentioned some of them.
I guess for doing prayer at different times during the day and things like that. I guess the sort of things that I tend to use online tend to maybe be a little more niche or whatever. But maybe somebody from a computer science background working with databases. There's a website with a guy that's like doing his own translation of the Old Testament. Kind of learning Hebrew and then kind of looking, I guess, very rigorously at, okay, well, what's sort of this word in this context? And also, I think, trying to reproduce the original music that would go along with the text from these different notations that are in the manuscripts and stuff. I'm not musical, so I'm not sure.
You don't want to sing. You don't want to sing one of those songs. I'm just kidding. And then I did want to ask a little bit about sort of your international experience. Where did you meet your wife again?
I met her online.
Online, and she's from China.
Yeah.
And you two have managed to sort of live in China and in the U.S. And do you have any advice for people doing sort of cross-cultural relationships in church or beyond for living in cities and stuff like that?
Not really. I guess given our experience, we lived in Beijing, we were in Texas, Suzhou. My wife's background is a language teacher.
Right.
So the language, I guess, would be kind of a key part of it. Unfortunately, I can understand some Chinese if people are talking Chinese, but I can understand more than I can say.
Right.
But our kids are fluent in Chinese, and so that helped when we went back to China. They went to the local Chinese schools for a while. And then, sort of being in China and kind of experiencing the culture there is different than, just kind of hearing about it here. So
Right.
kind of having opportunities to kind of experience both cultures and knowing the language and things like that, is good for the family.
Got it. Yeah. And then our audience, the people listening, are just generally people subscribed to sort of our Sattler marketing lines of communication. And
Right.
I think there's a lot of people on that, and we don't know who exactly it is. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention to anybody in the audience that we haven't talked about yet? Or
Not too much. Yeah, I mean, we've been working on that project to look at Sattler's mission statement.
Oh, right.
So kind of a focus on training graduates to kind of strengthen communities, whether they're parts of the community or building new communities. Looking at biblical languages, looking at sources of Christianity kind of throughout history, and an emphasis on holistic discipleship and kind of relationship building. So I think Sattler has a very unique sort of niche that they're fulfilling, and I think it's something that a lot of people would be interested in. I guess, unfortunately, people aren't as aware of it as they should be. When you meet people like, oh, I didn't know there was a college, downtown Boston and so on. So hopefully we can get the word out and, welcome people to come and visit, sit in on some computer science classes or other classes as well.
And then is there anywhere that we can follow your work, or anywhere that you point people to sort of read about the things that you're passionate about? I don't know if...
Yeah, not really, no.
Okay, yeah. And then are any of those capstones listed online anywhere yet? I
think some of the material is online, yeah.
Right. I think I'd love to point people to those in do we have show notes or something like that? Show notes. Particularly, there's a few that the natural language processing one, I think, is a really interesting one.
Right.
Not they're all interesting, but I know I've heard a lot of excitement about looking that. And
right. Well, he went to Bulgaria over the summer and presented a paper on what he'd done.
So maybe we can link those. And for everybody listening, I'm going to close out unless there's anything else to say.
No, that's fine.
Derrick, Graham, anything else? All right. Yeah. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being here. I know that it's a massive field and there's a lot to cover. So if you're interested in learning more, send us a note at info@sattler.edu. We'll put you in contact with Dr. Tate. And then also some next events coming up. If you happen to be in Pennsylvania on November 3rd, I'll be there giving a sort of a investing in service talk about how Sattler's really trying to shake up the tuition model. And it's really good news, I think, for some future students. And then also educators. I think all of this means a lot in terms of designing institutions that work for people. So we're trying hard to really make this an affordable and excellent experience. Not only affordable, but trying hard to look at how colleges use tuition. So join me there. And then beyond that, keep your eyes peeled for some open houses in the spring and things like that. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Derrick.
Thank you.